out this evening. Brett said my name is Jeff Holtz. I'm principal of College of Ecological. And been working on this project for the town for the past couple of years, and finally getting it wrapped up here. So what I'd like to do is just present some of the highlights this evening. I'm not going to take up too much of your time. This will be interesting and informative. And then I'd like to open up the questions as we go along or towards the end of the presentation itself. So just kind of give you an overview about the project. First thing I'd like to just kind of talk about for a moment is what is an NRI? An NRI is a natural resource inventory, and it can be on multiple scales. This particular NRI was town-wide, and I'm going to get into a little bit more details of that. But basically, it's an inventory of your natural resources. So you can do it on a town-wide scale, on a watershed scale. You can do it on a parcel-based scale. You can do this from what I call armchair exercises, using existing information, preparing a bunch of maps that help you understand where your natural resources are. Or you can get into a little detail like we did with this project and actually get on the ground and start verifying some of this information because there's error that's involved with some of this. And basically keeping a tally of what's going on. So what is the Conservation Commission's role? RSA 36A2 basically says that your commission, if you have one in your town, you have the responsibility of creating an NRI, of understanding where your wetlands are, streams, ponds, and other natural resources in the town. So the Hillsborough Conservation Commission took this very seriously, and thus we started the Hillsborough Natural Resource Inventory and Conservation Priorities Plan. Why do we do them? Well, we really want to use this as a foundation of informed land use planning. As you are developing your landscape, what are you developing? What may be hindered during this process? It contributes to the vital part of your cultural and economic structure, identifies resources that are threatened by human population growth, and it really helps out with the first phase of a conservation plan, and that's one of the things that we started to outline here. So we didn't just do the inventory, we just didn't identify where the resources are. We then took a hard look at identifying of those particular resources, which one really stand out amongst them all. So the overall scope was to develop what I call an enhanced NRI to help promote resource protection and that informed land use planning on a town-wide scale. We had lots of goals for this particular project. One was to solicit community input and participation. We had 2 community forums that took place in 2011, one in spring and one in summer, was to try to get the folks to understand what the project was about and to provide some input throughout the process. Natural resources mapping, well, that's one of the main pieces of an NRI, or showing where these resources are. So we developed a series of NRI maps through this, and we also did a lot of refining as opposed to relying exclusively on existing data. And so there were some things that we could do fairly easily. Going out and checking soil types, that was definitely not on the list to do. But things such as wetlands in the town, surface water bodies like ponds and lakes, and then grassland areas, or maybe hay fields or pasture lands. These are some things that we can easily do efficiently to make them more accurate to Hillsborough. And we also verified to the extent possible the Wildlife Action Plan habitats. Back in 2005, the New Hampshire Fish and Game developed what's called the Wildlife Action Plan. In 2010, they updated this mapping, this data, and what it was they mapped a lot of big-scale wildlife habitats. They didn't get down to really small scale, like here in rookeries and vernal pools that we found here in town. But it was a good basis for us to start. So are these habitats actually out there? Because some of them are computer-driven, especially the different forest types that I'll get in a moment. We also assessed a list of focal species to really try to get a handle on looking at habitat connectivity and maybe where some wildlife corridors are, some particular areas where habitats are being linked up and where animals are moving through the area. And then we mapped also additional ecological features, such things as like vernal pools and heron rookeries that I mentioned just a minute ago. And then we were also looking for any species of conservation concern, and that is derived from the list that came out of the Wildlife Action Plan. So these included endangered and threatened, but other species that are of conservation concern because they're declining in the state. So then that brought in the field assessments part. And then the penultimate goal of this was to identify conservation priorities. So with the community participation, as I mentioned, we had two forums. The first forum was really looking at the strengths and challenges of natural resources protection in town. So the strengths, some of the strengths, just going to give you a couple highlights, and you can probably identify with these. The rural nature of Hillsborough, large tracts of protected lands was seen as a big strength. The varying topography and the diverse wildlife and habitat challenges, which seem to be the same in all communities, is how to balance growth in the town with protection of natural resources, so development pressures, fragmentation, and one other thing was the bypass acting as a sort of a north-south barrier for wildlife movement. Then the second forum we used to, and then we also identified in the first forum some of Hillsborough's significant natural areas. And so that was a great way for the community to come out, for me to get a good understanding of Hillsborough's landscape and where some of the special places are, things that are people that are seeing out on the landscape. Then our second community forum really looked at identifying what are the most important natural resources in Hillsborough. This was a way to prioritize the importance of natural resources, to help with a modeling exercise that I use, that then used to prioritize where we'd like to do site visits. Because we did get out on the landscape, we got out on public properties, we used private properties who landowners provide us with written permission to go onto there, and then also did roadside surveys as well. So the second one helped to inform where were we going to ask permission to access these. So there's four main themes to this natural resource inventory, or NRI as I'll continue to call it. We have water resources, ecological resources, agricultural resources, and forest resources. And then we boil that all down into defining conservation priorities within each one of those four themes. So I'd like to talk about water resources for a moment. This may be a little difficult to tell, but this is one of the maps that's involved with our water resources. And what you're seeing here, these big colors here, are the major watersheds in Hillsborough: Sandbrook, Beardbrook, Shedbrook, and then Franklin Pierce Lake watershed itself. Other things that are included on here are wetlands, ponds and lakes, and rivers and streams that you're probably all familiar with. So we have things like Beardbrook, Shedbrook, Branch River, the Contucket River that runs through here. We have a variety of wetlands, the infamous Farrar Marsh down here in this bottom corner here, along with a variety of other wetlands around the town that we've identified and refined. The second main piece to the water resources, now we're looking at what's under the ground, basically. Before we're kind of looking up at the top of what we can see all the time. And some things that we don't think about so much because we can't see them are aquifers. So these are stratified drift aquifers, and basically these are areas where water is stored, and these sands and gravels that were deposited about 12,000 years ago after the glaciers had receded. So these are significant for your community. You're going to identify future water sources for the area. So what you see here in blue is what the U.S. Geological Survey has mapped for stratified drift aquifers. You can see them along here, along Shedbrook, Beardbrook, down into this area, although most of this is out of the town, all along the Contucket here, and then a little bit on this side where the Branch and Beardbrook meet in as well. So it's hard to tell here, but these are different shades of blue. The darker the blue, the higher transmissivity rate. Basically, that's a fancy word for saying where the areas that have a lot of water, high transmissivity rates, kind of equates to a lot of water moving through these sands and gravels. But we took this even one step further to identify what's known as favorable gravel well analysis. Now, this was an analysis that was done by Department of Environmental Services with the help of the Society for the Protection of New Hampshire Forests. What they were looking at, they were trying to identify, basically they were prioritizing these stratified drift aquifers for the whole state of New Hampshire. They didn't just do it for Hillsborough or the southwest part of New Hampshire. Try to identify areas that have a really high yield of good, clean drinking water. So this is in a way to help communities identify sites that they may want to think about into the future for future community well sites. And these are sites that have greater than 75 gallons per minute. That's what they predict. And again, it has really good water quality because DES, Department of Environmental Services, they have a lot of data on known pollution, okay, known contamination sites and stuff like that. So they use that information along with these high yield rates. And that's what you're seeing here in this dark red. So all on Took River here, in this particular area down at the base of the lower area of Beard Brook, there's a couple of areas, and over by Pierce.
That's pollution, you said?
No, those are really good sites that is predicted that has good clean water and high flow. Now, on all of these maps, there's also conservation lands that are on there as well. Some of them are easier to see. You have a report right in front of you, or they'll have big maps. It'll be much clearer to see them up here. So that's our water resources. And I'd like to move into ecological resources. It really looks at wildlife and plant life. So, as I mentioned for the Wildlife Action Plan, we use that data as a base to help create this particular map. So they map different forest types, marshes, peatlands, floodplains, things like this. And then we created some data in our mapping software, and then also refined it based on site visits. So we used the Wildlife Action Plan data, and basically what's coming up, you see the dark green here, which covers all of Hillsborough essentially. Most of Hillsborough is a hemlock hardwood pine forest. All sorts of different mix of species that are in there, but that's a basic forest ecosystem. And it's very common for the southern part of New Hampshire, and especially over in the southwestern part. However, there are a few other small patches of different forest types. You can see here in the orange, here on Thompson Hill. Those are northern hardwood forests. So there's a little bit in Hillsborough, or predicted to be anyway. And then there's also, this is the different green color here. These are spruce fir forests, like up in Low State Forest up here. So we have a little bit of that, and you see a touch of brown scattered throughout. And those are Appalachian oak pine forests. Didn't really see any strong evidence of this forest existing. The place I did visit, I would go check to see if these forest types were there. They're not. We do have the species here, like chestnut, like white oak, species like this that are associated with that. But they really start to drop out as you start to move further north here. You can kind of go up the Connecticut River Valley and find it. You can go up into the southern part of the Lakes region and kind of find it. Down in Merrimack, that part of the state, they have a lot more of this. These forests really have more of a southern affinity to them. And they can have some really rare forest types that are associated with them. Didn't see any throughout, but it is predicted to have some here. Also, this shows these marshes that were mapped. Here's Farrar Marsh right here, mapped by the Wildlife Action Plan. I mentioned peatlands. There's a variety of peatlands. These are in blue scattered out. Mud Pond over here at Fox State Forest. A variety of floodplains throughout Hillsborough. Some really significant things I'll get to in a moment. All along Pontoon River here, down here where Beard Brook, Shed Brook come together, down at the base here and along the branch. A few other types worth mentioning. Those are the main Wildlife Action Plan habitats. And then on top of this, we created this data layer where you see these red splotches are. These are steep south-facing slopes. These areas can be really significant for denning sites because they may be associated with talus slopes or piles of rocks, basically, that are coming down in these steep areas. That may serve as good snake hibernaculum in the wintertime right now. They're gone. And also maybe some good bobcat habitat as well. Then there's a few pieces, there's a couple more things on there, but there's a few more pieces that weren't mapped by the Wildlife Action Plan, and rightly so. These are really fine scale, discrete places that you can't model these necessarily. These include heron rookery. So what we have here is a great big hen sitting atop a nest This is on town-owned property. Then we have another heron rookery that actually, it may be hard to tell, these are green herons roosting up in a tree, which is really neat. I don't get a chance to see that an awful lot. So that was really a significant site because it was also a rookery for the great-blue herons. And that day I was out there was a variety of vultures that were roosting out as well. So heron rookeries. Another thing that's really fine scale that would be really expensive on a state level to do is to map vernal pools. So I used a lot of aerial photography. 2010, 2011 was the most current aerial photography that they flew for the state. And each town got it for free. You could opt in and get better resolution, but what they give you for free is really good. I was able to map some vernal pools, go out and field check them, identify them, as well as on sites, just sort of stumbling upon some of them. So what we have here is about 116 vernal pools. Some have been confirmed, some are just potential because I may have found them at the wrong time of the year to actually confirm them, because we confirm them based on the species, how we find them in these obligate species. So this is a vernal pool right here. What we have up top here is one type of obligate species, this is wood frog. These tadpole are just now emerging from these egg masses, and then spotted salamanders. So these were the two main obligate species that I was finding in these vernal pools to confirm them as such. Now I can take credit for all this. Marion Baker, throughout her years of educating students here in Hillsborough, has documented vernal pools as well, so she shared that information with me, and I incorporated that into this as well. Again, another fine scale habitat that we really need to map on the ground to confirm this information. So I mentioned focal species. So there's a variety of species that I look for that can help me better understand habitat quality, habitat health, as surrogates basically. And some of the things that I look for are large-ranging mammals such as bear, moose, bobcat, which is a species of conservation concern. I'm looking for otter and beaver. They have a really great, interesting relationship. Beavers start to come in and dam up an area, and all of a sudden you got otters hanging out using it for and also looking at mink. And some of these are area sensitive and sort of sensitive to human intrusion as well. So this is essentially a map. It's all color-coded of the different species that we found, these focal species all throughout. You can see some areas that are really concentrated along the contour here, up here on the town-owned property up here in this wetland, which is the heron rookery as well. So one of the things that you see all over Hillsborough is bear sign. It seemed like everywhere I go I was finding bear sign, especially in the northern half. And especially, you can find it just right along the roads. Take a look at the utility poles. I know the lighting in here isn't the best. This is a bear bit pole, bear scratch pole. I was going down on some roads, and I forget the name of the more sort of the northwest part, getting way out, pucker brush on those. And there was new poles, and I'm assuming that they were hit so much by bear they had to eventually replace the poles. So these bear bit poles were all over the place. You can't tell it maybe, but this was a stump over up. This was out on the town-owned property by the wetland. Bear scat was everywhere. You can find beech trees, or you can find claw marks from the bears going up the tree to eat the nuts. Bear sign, very common, which is a good thing. Moose. Down here, I'd like to bring your attention to this is a multiple trunk red maple. Courteous of Fred Charrington, I'm going to have a couple of his photos in here, so I'll give credit where credit's due there. And these are barked up, or incisor scrapes. Striped maple, they love to bark that as well. That's a term I like to use. And they basically take the lower incisors and scrape the bark, and they're really eating that material underneath that cambium tissue, that living material. Oh, that's great. Again, back to the wetland on the town-owned property over by Loon Pond, northeast of Loon Pond. Moose out there as well. Scat was everywhere on the property. Barking was everywhere. And I went out there a couple of times. I never got to see moose. I got to see tracks and everything else. But I did have an intern working with me on this. And just about every time he went to the property, he'd come back with one of those and he'd call me on his way home. And I'm like, oh, this is great. But several times he saw the little moose out there. He actually saw cow in half one time walking through the woods out there. So we found sign of moose scattered all throughout, mostly in the northern half and then down by the Pontotoc River. And then a variety of other things. Looking at birds, bobolinks, there's a couple of really strong populations of bobolinks in Hillsborough, which I really like to see. They're on the decline. A lot of our grassy birds are on the decline because a lot of our grasses have turned back to forest and some are still reverting back. Osprey, seen hunting along the Pontotoc River. Speaking of the Pontotoc River, a bird friend of mine, he has seen on several occasions pike-billed grebe in the Pontotoc River, albeit the stern migration. That's a invasive species. But I guess we'll get to Pontotoc here in a little bit. Bobcat. When I was out tracking, some bobcat moving through Hillsborough, which none of this really surprised me. Now we're documenting it. And where I found them didn't surprise me either. And to be honest, I was looking in spots that I expected to find them. But I looked in spots that I didn't expect to find them, just to confirm that as well. Here are some tracks right here. A nice slide. Another set of tracks. And this thing just kept doing that. You probably know what I'm getting to here. Otter. You're finding otter in a lot of the brooks around here. Shed Brook. Sand Brook, you name it. We've seen them in a lot of different places. Beard Brook a lot. I mentioned rare species and other species of conservation concern. There's a couple that's known. This is what has been known in Hillsborough, but I didn't get to see out on the landscape. Things like wood turtle, and I'm sure with all the streams in here, all the wooded streams you probably have wood turtles around. They're really hard to try to find. Very quiet, and you need a big group of people actually to get out in the forest to really try to find these things. Green snakes are known to exist here, loons up on Loon Pond, and then a variety of rare natural communities. Natural communities, you can think of them as like habitat types, forest types. There's a variety of different forest types that are out there, and they're also correspond to a particular natural community. So the New Hampshire Natural Heritage Bureau keeps a database of this information and identifies, even if it's a really common forest type, if it's a really great example, like down in Pisgah, down in my neck of the woods, we've identified 8,000 acres of this hemlock hardwood pine forest that we have here. That place is really, really exquisite. It was never opened up for agriculture. So that place is very special. It's a great example of that forest type. So, and it also includes rare types, like the silver maple floodplain forest, which is along the Pontotoc River that found along a pretty good stretch. So we don't have a whole lot of these around, very rare type. Also, probably a lot of people know this, the black gum swamp that's over in Fox State Forest. Mud Pond is also identified as an exemplary peatland system as well. Now, another piece that we look at when we're talking about these ecological resources is the unfragmented landscape. The Wildlife Action Plan created this unfragmented data layer for the whole state. And essentially what we were looking at were class 1 through 5 roads. So highways, interstates, all the way down to residential roads. But those class 6 roads, they didn't include those. There was a little problem with the data. The DOT data isn't exactly up to date. So we refined this. We made this correct for Hillsborough. But basically what we're looking at, these are essentially roadless areas that we want to take this into consideration when you're thinking of planning on a town-wide scale. The larger the unfragmented block, generally speaking, you're going to have higher species diversity. You got really small blocks, area-sensitive species like bobcat and bear, you're going to find them in really small blocks. So for Hillsborough, the darker the red, the larger the block. So this is a huge area of unfragmented land here, roadless area. This area up here extends up to the Bradford Road. That's 22,000 acres of forest land, wetlands, and other types of habitats that is fairly roadless. Yeah, there may be some class 6 roads in there. You're not going to have a whole lot of mortality when you have the ATV running down that road. So we took a look at that. I mentioned tracking. Part of this, looking at habitat connectivity and potential corridors, we went out, that was a horrible snow season last year. 3 snow events. I was able to get out and do tracking. And so that was the end of 2011 to 2012. But I was able to get out and drive a lot of the roadways in one day each time, and was tracking by roadside. And I would record the species that were crossing the roads, down the species. So this is what I was seeing this time. Route 9, not a whole lot. That was a deer, one time, which is kind of what I was expecting. Big barrier to wildlife movement. But, however, going along Shed Brook, going along Beard Brook here, up in Sand Brook, and through particular areas all through here, a lot of major activity going across, as well as going up and down these streams. It was something that I had expected. Most of it, coyotes and deer, but I would see things such as moose. I would see otter cruising through up and down. I drive across the bridge, there's a sign of the otter coming in and out of the creeks themselves, so they're using these particular areas. Mink, bobcat, I didn't already mention that. So this is the whole amalgamation of those 3 days worth of tracking. So this gave us a sense of where the critters moving, where the habitats are. And again, it didn't surprise me. Sort of the more you get out into more rural areas, you tend to have more wildlife movement going on, and those area-sensitive species. Moving on to our third theme, agricultural resources. Now these next 2 things are really soils-based, so using the USDA's soil mapping to help tease out these next 2 resources. So one is agricultural resources. So there's their data set. We can break it out into where the best places to farm as far as they're concerned, is for producing feed, forage, and fiber. So this really doesn't look at grazing necessarily, pasture land, but it does look at hay fields. It looks at growing crops and things like this. So there's 3 different types. There's prime farmland soils, which is like the best. And it's based on a whole lot of different chemistry, water table, the drainage, and a lot of factors went into it. So anyway, prime farmland soils of statewide significance, and the farmland soils of local significance. And that last one is what you see here. These are the farmland soils of local significance, all these yellow patches. The prime farmland soils are these green patches. And you see this big green patch kind of standing where the prime farmland soil used to be, I guess. And then in the red are those that are statewide significance. And then we put on top of that the revised grassland, pastureland, hayfield data layer on top of that you can't see here. So that gives us a sense of where these agricultural resources, active farms and really good farming soils. So we did the same thing with forest resources. The dark color here, the brownish color that you see, those are soil types that are really good for hardwood production, for producing really good value hardwood timber. And again, this is developed by the USDA, United States Department of Agriculture. The yellow areas are those that are really good at producing softwood, particularly white pine. And there's always a little trend that goes along with this. You see them along the streams and rivers and around wetlands where there's really good drainage soil that white pine really likes to grow in. And so while we're talking about forests, I'd like to show you just a few pictures of some really amazing individuals that I found out walking around with some help from some others. So going up Thompson Hill, actually we were coming down Thompson Hill on that day with Brett and the intern, and we see this massive hop hornbeam. Those who know what hop hornbeams are, these are understory trees. They don't get really big. They call it, there's so many different common names, ironwood, levelwood, all these different names. But this was one of the biggest ones by far. These trees, if you see a foot and a half, that's in diameter, that's a big one. This one was over 2 feet in diameter. And this thing grew out in the open. You see all the low limbs on there. So just a really, really interesting hop hornbeam. The pine right here, this gives testament to our past land use history as well. You see all the low limbs. This is about a 3.5, 4 foot white pine, reaching 150 years plus maybe. all the low-growing limbs and then the multiple limbs up top. This was, if you ever heard the term wolf pine or pasture pine, this was one of those pasture pines that was out on the sheep pastures back. These were very common back in the 1800s when sheep fever was going on, and then carried on from then. So they're interesting trees that really speak about past land use history whenever we were colonizing the area. Nice big sugar maples, 3.5, 4 foot sugar maple. Over here, my other field assistant. This is a hemlock that we found out in Fox State Forest. There's a variety of trees that are really nice in Fox State Forest. Hemlock's well over 200 years old. Really nice white pines in the particular area. So some sort of the giants in Hillsborough. Here's two very large white oaks that I personally didn't see. This is courtesy of Brett Charrington. This was also out in Fox State Forest, huge white oak. So there's a variety of these sitting out on our landscape out there. And we can't forget about the state champion red oak that's here in Hillsborough, state champion, at over 7 feet in diameter. That's a huge tree. And now I just recently learned that Hillsborough has a champion chestnut tree, and that may be state champion. We're not sure if it's either state or county. That's how they take a look at these. They call them champion trees or the big trees. So the state keeps like a database of these for will and landowners that want to let the state know they have these really nice old trees on their landscape. Okay, so those are the variety of natural resources that we map for the town of those 4 themes. So now what I'd like to do briefly before we open it up to questions and answers is to go through here and now tease out some of those that are the highest quality, we would say. So let's start with wetlands here. What you see here are a variety of wetlands in different colors on here. And back in 2009, there was a variety of wetlands that were evaluated throughout Hillsborough. I think the Conservation Commission was in charge of that and had some students helping out with that. Originally, they looked at 128 wetlands, but they developed a criteria that kind of broke it down where I think about 32 wetlands in all were eventually evaluated. So they were looking at wetlands that were greater than 10 acres in size, and at least half or more of those were mapped as having these wetland soils. It's called very poorly drained soil. So after looking at that, they teased out 32, and that's what you're seeing here. So. And this evaluation is, it's called the New Hampshire method, for sure. They just revised it not too long ago, so this was the older version that they used. But they looked at a variety of ecological functions and values. They looked at things such as ecological integrity or the health. And within each one of these that I'll ramble off, there's a series of questions that was answered about these. So wetland wildlife habitat, fish habitat. They looked at it from a flood control perspective, looking at it from groundwater recharge for those aquifers that are underneath, cleaning that water while it drains back down. There they looked at it. There was functions such as nutrient removal, sediment trapping. Then it also looked at human values such as recreation, such as the visual aesthetics of wetlands themselves, and then educational value. So after they ranked all these, this is basically what they came up with. The areas that are in red turned out to be the most highest ranked wetlands for our marsh up here in Hillsborough. And then the green ones are more of a medium rank. So now we know where the really high quality wetlands are in Hillsborough. And I did that same with agricultural resources. So what you see in here, like this mustard yellow kind of color, are highest quality agricultural resources. So we took those really good farm soils and overlaid that with where we knew existing open areas were, whether it was a hayfield, whether it was a pasture, whether it was just a grassland. Okay, and so this is what came up. So we're talking about this area here where we have Fox State Forest right here, by pond, down in the Bear Hill area itself, up off of East Washington. So these areas came out as being the highest quality agricultural resources. We did the same with forest soils. Forest soils were rather widespread, the different types. And so then what I did, I took a look at these from the unfragmented landscape. So where are unfragmented blocks of these really good forest soils? And I also teased out, as I did with agricultural soils, the developed area, because if you noticed before, they were saying there was some really good forest soils up here. Well, this is where everything has been developed, so then we need to show that information. And then finally, looking at this from an ecological lens, looking at ecologically significant areas. And that's what sort of this all kind of boils down to. So for conservation planning, this is something that you would want to use. Say if you have a willing landowner that came to you and said, I'd like to put my land in conservation, but I'm going to need some financial help doing so. Does that property lie within one of these particular areas? Does it fit the bill for your town? Is it worth the money that you may spend on that? Is it you're going to get the best bang for your buck, the best conservation bang for your buck? So this is what we came up with. 6 different areas. So we have the Shed Brook, the Black Pond area, comes down the confluence of Beard Brook. We have the Beard Brook and its headwaters coming down to the confluence of the branch down here. We have the Detention Pond, Loon Pond, up the Thompson Hill area, the Farrar Marsh area, Fox State Forest, there's really nice fields in between. And then the Contook River and Bear Hill grasslands area, all the way over and including the branch. So how did I identify these? There was a variety of factors that went into this. So we were looking at things such as the unfragmented landscape, that wildlife movement, that habitat connectivity, sort of a clustering effect of a lot of really good habitats in close approximation to one another. Looking at those focal species, those wetlands of high value, looking at those exemplary or rare natural communities, where were they? Looking at those really high value agricultural resource areas and high value forest resource areas. May forget some here. Looking at the wildlife action plan, what they said are really high quality habitats, because I didn't cover every square inch. I didn't go on to all the properties. Again, only those that provided me with permission. Where were they saying were high quality habitats? And also they did a ranking throughout the whole state. So there's certain areas that rank really high in Hillsborough and widespread throughout the town that rank as some of the best in the state and some of the best in the biological region. And when they say biological region, they're talking about the watershed area. And that this co-occurrence model that we developed as well. And what that does is look where a lot of natural resources co-occur, so they may be high value. So all these things were taken into account whenever defining these particular areas. And I'd be happy to go into one of them just to give you an idea here. So let's take a look at Pontoon and branch area throughout here. So this is part of an unfragmented block that's at least 3,000 acres, so a large block of land. You expect to find a lot, and that extends further to the south and to the west over here. The Contook River and the branch are state designated rivers, so it's been recognized how special it is for its natural resources and its cultural resources. Tons of archaeological sites are found along, the whole stretch of Contook River, rare plants, rare animals. Really high quality floodplains. I mentioned the silver maple floodplain swamps, rare communities, rare exemplary communities that are out there. Serves really well for wildlife movement through there. We're getting a lot of movement through there. The grasslands and pastures along Bear Hill, those are some of the strongest populations of bobolinks that you have here in Hillsborough. So very significant for those grassland birds. Really high density of vernal pools within this area, combined within this area. It has some of the best soils in the town for growing hardwoods. It's the highest or the largest contiguous block of those high quality agricultural soils. And combined also with those fields where the bobolinks are found. And it contains some of the most significant aquifers in the town as well, where those high quality, high yield aquifers are. So all these things come together to play, and I probably forgot a couple of them. that help to identify this area as very significant. And talking about barriers for movement, Route 9 really serves as a barrier for movement. You've got a lot of traffic going through. I'm sure you have mortality rates of different animals. But there's a pinch zone that's right here across Main Street, going up Beardbrook, and Beardbrook meets the branch, which eventually comes down and hits the conflict of deer. That wildlife movement has been seen going through that particular area. A bear, in particular, female and its cubs. So there is some movement going north and south, absolutely. And this is probably one of the pinch zones for the area, because most of the development is in the southern area, which does inhibit wildlife movement. So these are the ecologically significant areas that we've identified. So just quickly, what are some of the uses for this? Well, incorporating into the master plan, which after we develop the final draft, we'll be using this report to develop a natural resources section for the upcoming revised master plan. You can educate town officials and community members about the importance of natural resources. What resources are out there and where are they out there? And why are they even important? What makes them so significant? You can promote the protection of biological diversity, outreach to landowners that are interested in learning more about what's on their property. Maybe they want to use this information to promote their land management or forest management of their property. You can look at this through the lens of acquisition of grants. And one of the most important things is to promote that informed land use and management throughout the community. So I'd like to end this. I'd like to thank the Hillsborough Conservation Commission for all their work. They put a lot of time into this, a lot of legwork. Went out to the field, me and my intern. I'd like to thank all those forum participants, there's a few in here, that helped out with this process. And John Peckham, who was an impeccable field assistant, graduate student from Antioch, one of my students from there. So without him, we couldn't have gotten out and collected as much information as we could have. So with that said, I'd be happy to answer and entertain any questions that you may have.
How do you map an aquifer?
Well, we'd have to ask the USGS that. I'm not sure exactly the technique that they use mapping those. However, they would test some of these particular areas, and we know where it's called stratified drift. Basically, as the glaciers were receding, the meltwaters were bringing these sands and gravels in particular areas, and so there's high rates of association between wetlands and where these gravel deposits were. So they knew where these gravel deposits were, and then they would go out and test some of them. Other than that, I don't know the whole process of how they map it. Anything else? Scenic views. Yeah, there's quite a few. You guys have a lot of hills around here, which is really nice. Go up Thompson Hill. There's some nice views, nice rocky areas up there. All No, that wasn't part of it. Yeah. Scenic views is something else. Some towns do include that, like a scenic view shed, especially if you're interested in developing telecommunications zoning around that. Yeah, they're citing those particular areas. Very good sites, there may be some bad sites. Well, like Thompson Hill was a good one. I didn't have access to a whole lot of hills around here. That was one of the most memorable ones because it's a nice rocky ball. No. Yeah, absolutely. Something. All
We
right.
might have said this before, but if we wanted to see some of those maps more closely and stuff, they're just all the town offices now.
Not yet. There will. It's actually, I think, on the Conservation Commission. I'll let Brett take over that.
Yeah, we're actually planning to get the draft online within the next few weeks. And we're going to be finishing up the NRI by the end of the year or early next year. And then we'll have the actual final product that we plan on putting online. We also plan on having a copy in the town offices and in the town library. And there will be full-size maps available so you can see them on large scale at that point.
Prior to the map being
Yep.
everything online, so that if there's any town people
Right, we're gonna try to get that online as soon as we can, in draft form, so we can get that kind of response. So if you go onto the town website, and then under boards and committees, and then Conservation Commission, we'll have a link there to be able to access that. I can't say exactly how soon it's going to be on, but we're hoping for in the next couple of weeks. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much for coming. Thank you, Jeff. Feel free to hang around and chat about the presentation. There's some refreshments in the back. And for the commission members, we will be having a business meeting shortly thereafter. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you, Jeff.